You see guys on TV in bright red jackets and think you know the Arctic. You don't. Today, you take a cruise ship with Wi-Fi and heated blankets. In 1900, you wore a wool sweater and prayed the wind didn't freeze your lungs shut. Explorers boiled their own leather boots and ate them to stay alive. They ate food from tin cans that leaked lead and poisoned their blood. Ships got stuck in the pack ice, and crews lived in total darkness for 2 years. They even killed their sled dogs for meat. But the dog livers had so much vitamin A, it made their skin peel off until they died. If you like these stories, hit subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I want to know. Now, let's go back to 1845. This is how the mess actually started. 1845. London is the center of the world. But if you look at a map from back then, the top and the bottom of just blank, white space. The British Navy hated that. They wanted to own the whole thing. But it wasn't a race for science. It was a race for ego. Who signs up for a trip to a place that wants to kill you? 2 types of guys. First, you have the Navy officers. These guys are desperate. It's been 30 years since the last big war. No war means no glory. No glory means no promotions. You're stuck as a lieutenant for 20 years while your hair turns gray. If you want a new stripe on your sleeve, you don't wait for a fight. You go find a shortcut through the ice. You find the Northwest Passage, or you hit the North Pole. It was the only way to move up the ladder. Then you have the rich guys, the gentlemen explorers. They don't need the paycheck. They want the fame. They want to come home and have people clap for them in the streets. They want statues built in their honor. They saw the Arctic as a stage. They were the stars. The ice was just the backdrop. Here is where the mistakes started. These guys didn't pack for survival. They packed for a lifestyle. They filled the hulls of their ships with stuff they'd use at a high-end social club. We're talking crates of fine wine, hundreds of gallons of rum. They brought silver forks and spoons, not the cheap stuff, heavy sterling silver engraved with their family crests. They brought fine china plates that would shatter the moment the ship hit a wave. One expedition carried a library of 1,200 books, leather-bound classics, Dickens, Shakespeare. They even brought a hand organ that played 50 different tunes. They thought they could bring London with them. They thought if they kept their standards up, the environment wouldn't matter. They treated the most dangerous place on Earth like a long hike in the park. They didn't look at the Arctic and see a graveyard. Look at their clothes. The locals, the Inuit, had been living in the freeze for thousands of years. They knew how to stay alive. They wore caribou skin. They wore seal. It was light. It was warm. It let the moisture out so you didn't freeze in your own sweat. The British looked at those furs and laughed. They called it primitive. They stuck to their heavy wool coats, thick trousers, fancy uniforms with brass buttons. They thought English wool was the peak of technology. But wool is a trap. When you're dragging a sled, you sweat. The wool soaks it up like a sponge. Then you stop moving for 5 minutes. The wind hits you. That sweat turns into a sheet of ice against your skin. You aren't wearing a coat anymore. You're wearing a freezer. Those brass buttons, they'd get so cold, they'd rip the skin right off your fingers if you touched them without a glove. They were literally wearing their own coffins. The plan was even worse than the clothes. They didn't use dogs. To the British Navy, dogs were for people who didn't have backbone. That means they strapped themselves into leather harnesses like pack mules. They'd try to drag a sled weighing 1,000 pounds across jagged, broken ice. They thought grit was enough. They thought if they just kept their heads down and acted like gentlemen, the ice would give up. They didn't train for the terrain. They didn't learn how to hunt. They brought thousands of cans of meat instead. But there was a catch. The guy who won the contract for the canning was cheap. He was in a rush. He didn't seal the tins right. He used lead to solder them shut. So as these men sat in the dark, eating their civilized food, they were poisoning themselves. The lead was rotting their gums. It was messing with their heads. They were losing their minds before they even got off the ship. They didn't see the Arctic for what it was. They saw what they wanted it to be, a place to prove they were better than everyone else. They brought books instead of extra coal. They brought silver spoons instead of better boots. They chose pride over common sense. And the ice was just sitting there, waiting for them to make the first move. It didn't care about their medals. It didn't care about their family names. It was just a giant white machine built to grind them down. And they walked right into it, alone, heavy, and completely unprepared for what was coming next. You look at the ships they used, and you think they're tough. They're made of oak. They've got these massive ribs. They even bolted iron plates to the front, thinking that'd make a difference. It didn't. In the end, these things were just boxes of wood held together by hope and some rusty nails. You're talking about putting a wooden boat into an ocean that wants to turn back into solid rock. It's like trying to break a brick wall with a pencil. They didn't have maps, not real ones. They just had a compass that didn't work right because of the poles and a lot of ego. They'd sail north. They'd keep sailing until the water turned white. When they hit the ice, they didn't stop. They didn't pull back. They'd back up a few hundred yards, stoke the boilers until the engines screamed, and then they'd ram it. They'd hit the ice at full speed. The boat would lurch. You would groan. Imagine being below deck. You're trying to sleep, and the entire world sounds like it's being crushed in a giant's hand. Every time they hit, the ship would jump. He would ride up onto the ice. The wood would scream, and then it would slide back down. They did this for weeks, just to gain a few miles. And the decks? It was a disaster zone. You couldn't even walk from one end to the other. They packed everything they owned on top. You had 200 dogs chained up. They weren't pets. They were tools. They fought. They bit. They stayed out in the wind and the spray until their fur was matted with salt and ice. Then you had the coal, bags and bags of it. It covered every surface in a layer of black soot. You'd touch a railing and your hand would come back black. You'd eat a piece of bread and it would taste like coal dust. It got into your pores. It got into your eyes. You'd spend 3 years looking like a chimney sweep while you froze to death. The food was worse. They didn't have fresh meat. They had tin cans. But back then they sealed the cans with lead. So as they ate their salted beef, they were slowly poisoning their own brains. They were getting dumber and more tired every time they sat down for a meal. They were eating garbage and thinking it would give them the strength to conquer a continent. And then there was the plan. This is the part that gets me. They wanted to get trapped. That was the goal. They'd push as far north as they could, wait for the temperature to drop, and let the ice grab them. They called it wintering over. They'd take down the sails. They'd build a little roof over the deck. They'd turn the ship into a house a house made of wood trapped in a vise of ice. They figured they'd just hang out, play cards, and stay warm until spring. Then, once the sun came back, they'd get out of their bunks, strap on their boots, and walk. They'd leave the ship behind and try to hike over 1,000 miles of jagged, shifting ice. But here's what they didn't realize. The ice doesn't just sit there. It moves. It grinds. When the ocean freezes, it expands. It puts thousands of pounds of pressure on every square inch of that wooden hull. You'd be lying in your hammock, and you'd hear the wood start to pop. It sounds like a gunshot. Bang! Another beam snaps. Bang! The floor starts to buckle. You're sitting in your living room, and the walls are literally closing in on you. You can't stop it. You can't fight it. You just have to sit there in the dark and hope the wood holds longer than the ice pushes. Most of the time it didn't. They'd wake up and find the floorboards standing straight up. They'd find their cabin half the size it was the night before. That's when the panic sets in. That's when you realize you aren't an explorer. You're just a guy in a broken box, 1,000 miles from help, waiting for the ocean to swallow you whole. The noise ripped through your skull. Between the wind and the ice, it's a constant roar. Inside the ship, it was worse. You had the dogs howling above your head. You had the engines thumping. You had the coal shifting in the bins. And you had the ice. It doesn't just sit still. It groans. It sounds like someone is dragging a heavy piano across a hardwood floor, over and over, for 24 hours a day. You can't sleep. You can't think. You just sit there with your hands over your ears and pray for the spring. But the spring is when the real nightmare starts, because that's when you have to get out. That's when you have to step off that ship and on to the white. You look out at the horizon, and it's just nothing. No trees, no dirt, just a frozen, jagged mess. And you've got to drag a boat behind you. They didn't just walk. They dragged lifeboats filled with gear, thousands of pounds. Every step you take, the ice breaks. Every step you sink into the slush. Your boots are wet. Your feet freeze. You lose a toe. Then you lose another. And you still have 900 miles to go. They did all of this on purpose. They planned for it. They thought they were being smart. They thought they could beat the planet. But the planet was just waiting for them to get close enough to finish the job. You're sitting there in the harbor back home. You look at the charts. You see the gaps in the map. You think, if I just bring enough coal, if I just build the hull thick enough, I can win. You spend years raising money. You buy the best canned meat. You hire the toughest guys you can find. You think you've covered every exit. But the Arctic doesn't care about your resume. It waits. It lets you in. That's the trick. It lets you get miles away from anything. Then it closes the door. It starts with a sound. You're down in your bunk. You hear a low rumble. It's not the engine. It's the hull. The ice is moving. You go up on deck and you look out. The open water you saw an hour ago is gone. It's all white now. Thick, jagged plates of ice are sliding over each other. They're called pressure ridges. Imagine two slabs of concrete the size of city blocks hitting each other. They don't stop. They just pile up. Your ship is in the middle of that. The ice grabs the keel. It lifts the whole boat up. Or it squeezes. You hear the beams start to moan. These are oak beams, thick as a man's waist. They start to bend. The bolts that hold the ship together can't take the pressure. They fly out of the walls like bullets. If you're standing in the wrong place, one of those bolts goes right through your head. Now you realize it. You aren't going anywhere. You're stuck. You look at the map, and you're hundreds of miles from the edge of the pack. You're a speck on a white sheet, and the sun is dipping below the horizon for the last time this year. It stays dark for months. You're living in a wooden box that's slowly being crushed. The temperature drops to 40 below, then 50, then 60. At 60 below, things stop working the way they should. Metal becomes brittle. If you touch a door handle with your bare hand, your skin sticks to it instantly. You have to rip the skin off to get free. Kerosene gets thick like syrup. It won't burn right, so you're sitting in the dark. Then there's the damp. You've got 30 men living in a small space. You're all breathing. You're all sweating. That moisture has nowhere to go. It rises to the ceiling and freezes. It forms long, jagged icicles right over your head. When the stove gets a little bit of heat going, those icicles melt. It rains on your face while you're trying to sleep. Then the heat dies down and it freezes again. You wake up in the morning. You try to move your legs. You can't. Your sleeping bag is made of reindeer skin. It's warm, but it soaks up your sweat. Overnight, that sweat turns to ice. Your bag is frozen to the floor or the wall. You have to keep a small mallet or a knife next to your pillow. You spend the first 10 minutes of your day chipping ice off your own bedding. You're hacking away at your own bed just so you can stand up. Your boots are the worst part. You take them off at night and they freeze solid. They're like two rocks. You can't put them on. You have to put them under your shirt against your bare skin to thaw them out with your body heat. It takes an hour. It hurts. It feels like someone is pressing a hot iron against your chest. But if you don't do it, you can't walk. And if you can't walk, you can't work. And if you don't work, you die. The ship starts to change, too. The dampness gets into the wood. It starts to rot. The walls grow mold. Not the green kind you see on bread. This is black, slimy stuff that smells like a wet dog. It covers everything. Your clothes, your food, the pages of your diary. You're breathing in mold and ice every second of every day. You look at the man across from you. He's got frostbite on his nose. His skin is turning black and peeling off in wet flakes. He doesn't even feel it anymore. He's just staring at the wall. You thought you were the hunter. You thought you were going to plant a flag and go home a hero. But you aren't the hunter. You're just a bit of meat trapped in the teeth of the world. And the world is starting to chew. Every time the wind picks up, the ice moves again. You hear the grinding sound miles away. It gets louder. It sounds like a freight train coming right for you. The whole ship shakes. You sit there in the dark, clutching your chisel, waiting to see if the hull is going to snap. You know that if the ice breaks the wood, the water will rush in. It won't be liquid water. It'll be slush that freezes you in seconds. So you sit. You chip the ice off your sleeves. You breathe in the smell of rot and old coal smoke. You wait for a sun that isn't coming back. You realize that all your plans, all your gear, all your smart ideas didn't mean a thing. You're just a man in a box, and the ice is getting tighter. So the ice is squeezing the ship. You're trapped in that wooden box. But the real threat isn't the pressure outside. It's the rot inside. It starts in your mouth. You're eating salt beef and dry crackers every single day. There's no color on your plate, no fruit, no fresh meat. Your body needs vitamin C to hold itself together. Without it, the glue that keeps your cells joined starts to melt. You wake up and run your tongue over your teeth. One of them feels loose. You push it with your finger and it wobbles. It doesn't hurt. That's the scary part. It just moves. Your gums turn a deep, bruised purple. They get soft. They swell up until they're covering your teeth. Then you spit. You're not spitting saliva. You're spitting black, clotted blood. You look down at your hand, and there's a molar sitting in your palm. It just fell out. You didn't bite anything hard. Your body just stopped holding on to it. Then things get weird. This is the part they don't tell you in the history books. Your body has a memory. Every time you've ever been hurt, your body fixed it. It grew scar tissue. It mended bones. But scurvy takes that away. It dissolves the old repairs. Imagine you're sitting on your bunk. You have a scar on your shin from a fence you climbed when you were 10 years old. You haven't thought about that cut in 20 years. Suddenly, that scar starts to itch. Then it turns red. Then it just opens. It's a fresh wound again. It starts bleeding like it happened 5 minutes ago. Your body is literally unraveling. If you ever broke a bone, the spot where it knitted back together starts to soften. The old break comes apart. You're falling to pieces from the inside out. You try to get up to do your job. You have to haul a rope or move a crate, but your legs won't listen. Your joints swell up until they look like watermelons. You try to stand, and your knees just buckle. You hit the floor. You're not just tired. You're empty. Your muscles have quit. You lay there on the cold planks, and you can't even lift your head. You're a grown man, and you're as helpless as a baby. The captains saw this happening. They knew the men were dying. They knew they needed fresh meat. They sent the hunters out into the dark. Remember, the sun is gone. It's pitch black out there. You're walking on moving ice with a heavy rifle. You're listening for the sound of a seal breathing. You hear a blowhole pop. You turn your head. You see a shadow move. You try to aim, but your fingers are so cold they won't fit inside the trigger guard. You pull your glove off, and your skin sticks to the frozen metal of the gun. You rip it away and leave a layer of your palm on the steel. By the time you're ready to fire, the seal is gone. It's slipped back into the black water. You walk back to the ship with nothing. No meat, no hope, just more blood in your boots. Then there's the lime juice, the big fix. The Navy gave every ship barrels of it. They told the captains to make the men drink it. It's supposed to be the cure, but the barrels are sitting in the hold. It's 50 below zero down there. The captain calls you up for your ration. He opens the barrel. But nothing pours out. The juice has turned into a solid block of green ice. It's a rock. You can't drink a rock. He takes a hand axe and starts swinging. He's hacking at the ice, trying to get a few chips for the men. He hands you a shard of frozen lime. It's jagged. It's freezing. You put it in your mouth, and it burns your tongue. It tastes like acid and old wood. You try to suck on it, but your gums are so raw it feels like you're chewing on broken glass. You swallow the melted slush and wait for it to work. But it's too late. The juice has been sitting in copper pipes, or it's too old. The vitamins are gone. You're drinking sour ice for nothing. You look at the man in the bunk across from you. He's staring at the ceiling. He hasn't moved in 6 hours. You realize he's not sleeping. He just stopped. The ice got him, and he didn't even have to leave his bed. You realize then that the ship isn't a shelter. It's a waiting room, and you're just waiting for your own skin to stop holding you in. The waiting ends when the ice starts to speak. You don't hear it at first. You feel it in your teeth. It's a low hum, a vibration that travels up through the keel and into your boots. Then the groaning starts. That's the wood. Oak and pine fighting 1,000,000 tons of frozen ocean. You want to believe the boat is strong. You have to, because if she isn't, you're dead. Simple as that. Then comes the first bang. It sounds like a .45 caliber pistol going off in the bunk next to you, but it's just a bolt. It's a steel bolt snapping under the pressure. The ice isn't just hitting the ship, it's squeezing it. Imagine a giant hand, a hand the size of a city. It's slowly closing its fist around your home. You run up top. You don't grab your coat, you just run. The deck isn't flat anymore, it's tilted. The ice has pushed one side of the boat up and the other side down. You see the railing. It's twisting. It looks like wire being bent by a pair of pliers. The masts are shaking. The rigging is screaming. All that rope is pulled so tight it hums like a guitar string. If one of those lines snaps, it'll cut a man in half. It's happened before. You stay low, and you keep moving. The captain is shouting. You can't hear the words. The wind takes them and throws them away, but you know what he means. Get the stuff off, now. You grab a crate of salt pork. It weighs 50 pounds. You don't feel the weight. You hurl it over the side. You watch it slide across the white crust. Then you grab another. You're throwing your life out onto the snow. You do it because the boat is turning into a coffin. The ice punches through. It's not a slow leak. The hull just gives up. You hear the wood splintering. It sounds like 1,000,000 dry sticks breaking at once. The ocean rushes in. It's so cold it burns. It hits the boiler, and the steam explodes upward. Now you've got hot smoke and freezing wind. You can't see your own hands. You're blind, and you're sinking. You find the dogs. They're howling. They know. They feel the ship dying under their paws. You grab them by the scruff and throw them onto the ice. They land in the soft snow and run. They don't look back. Smart animals. You're the one who stays. You're trying to save the lifeboats. You and 5 other guys grab the edge of a whaleboat. Your fingers freeze to the wood. You don't let go. You pull. You scream. You haul that boat over the rail and drop it 10 feet onto the ice. Your skin stays on the wood. You don't even feel the pain yet. The ship makes a sound I'll never forget. A long, slow shriek. It's the sound of the keel breaking. The spine of the boat is gone. She's folding in on herself. The ice moves in to finish the job. Huge blocks of it crawl up over the deck. They crush the cabin. They flatten the galley. Everything you had, your letters from home, your dry socks, your bed, it's all being ground into splinters. You jump. You have to. If you stay another second, the suction will pull you down into the dark. You hit the ice hard. It's not like solid ground. It moves. It heaves. You scramble away from the hole. You keep moving until your lungs feel like they're bleeding. Then you stop. You turn around. The ship is a wreck. It looks like a skeleton. The masts are leaning at crazy angles. The hull is a mess of broken teeth. And then she's gone. She just slides under. The ice closes over the top of her. It's smooth, like she was never there. Just a flat, white desert as far as you can see. Now, look at your feet. You're standing on 6 feet of frozen salt water. Beneath that is 2 miles of nothing. 2 miles of black water that wants to stop your heart. You look around at the guys. Everyone is white, not from fear, but from the frost. Their faces are covered in it. Their breath is freezing to their beards. Nobody says a word. Why would they? There's nobody to talk to. You're 1,000 miles from the nearest town. There's no radio. There's no plane coming to get you. You have a pile of crates, a couple of dogs, and a few wooden boats sitting on a moving cake of ice. The wind is hitting 80 miles an hour now. It's stripping the heat right out of your bones. You realize the ship wasn't just a waiting room. It was the only thing keeping the world out. Now, the world is in. It's in your boots. It's in your lungs. You look at the crate of crackers you saved. It's cracked open. Half of them are gone. You've got enough food for a month. Maybe, if you're lucky. If the ice doesn't crack right under your feet tonight and swallow you while you sleep. Look at Joe. His hand is bleeding. He doesn't even know. The blood is frozen before it can drip. He's just staring at the spot where the ship went down. We all are. You start to dig. You have to get out of the wind. You use your hands. You use pieces of the broken boat. You build a wall out of snow. It's a joke. You know it's a joke, but you do it anyway, because if you stop moving, you're just another piece of ice, and the ice doesn't feel anything. It just keeps pushing. It just keeps waiting for the next thing to break. You look at your hands. They're shaking. You wonder if you're the next thing. You don't have time to think about your hands. If you stop to look at them, you're dead. You reach down and grab the leather. It's not soft. It's frozen into a stiff, jagged loop. This is the harness. It's the same kind of rig you'd put on a plow horse or a mule. You slide your arms through the gaps. You settle the straps over your shoulders. You don't feel the cold for a second because the leather is so hard it just feels like wood pressing into your skin. You lean forward. You wait for the guy in front of you to give the word. Then you pull. The rope snaps tight. It makes a sound like a gunshot in the quiet air. Behind you, there's a wooden lifeboat. It's not in the water. It's sitting on top of the ice. It's packed to the brim with crates of salted beef, tins of fuel, and heavy canvas tents. It weighs about 800 pounds. There are 4 of you. Do the math. That's 200 pounds of dead weight dragging behind every man. And the ice isn't a skating rink. It's not flat. It's a mess of smashed-up blocks and ridges. Some are the size of a toaster. Some are the size of a garage. You don't glide. You jerk. You heave. Every time the boat hits a chunk of ice, it stops dead. Your neck snaps back. Your teeth rattle in your skull. You have to stop, walk back, and lift the front of the boat by hand. You grunt. You shove. You get it over the ridge. Then you get back in the harness and do it again. You do this for 10 hours straight. Within 10 minutes, you start to sweat. That's the irony of the Arctic. You're surrounded by a world that wants to freeze you solid, but your body is on fire. You're wearing layers of heavy wool. It doesn't breathe. The sweat starts at your hairline. It runs down your neck. It soaks into your undershirt. It pools in the small of your back. You feel the moisture running down your legs and into your boots. Your socks get heavy. Your feet start to slide around inside your leather boots. But you can't take a coat off. If you do, the wind hits that wet wool and you'll get frostbite in minutes. So you stay trapped in your own heat. You're a walking sauna. The problem is when you have to stop. You stop for a drink of water or to check the compass. The second you stop moving, your heart rate drops. The heat goes away. That sweat, it doesn't evaporate. It turns to ice. It happens fast. You can feel the shirt against your back turn into a sheet of frozen glass. It stiffens up. It starts to cut into your skin. You have to start moving again just to melt your own clothes. If you don't keep pulling, you become a human popsicle inside a wool suit. You look at the man in front of you. You don't see his face. You just see his back. You see the way his coat is white with frost. You see the heels of his boots. That's your entire world. Left foot, right foot. You watch the way his tendons strain against his trousers. You hear him breathing. It's not a normal breath. It's a wet, ragged sound. It's the sound of a man whose lungs are being scraped raw by the air. You realize you're making the same sound. You've been pulling since 6 in the morning. You're exhausted. Your muscles aren't just sore, they're failing. You've been eating about 2,000 calories a day, but you're burning 6,000. Your body has already used up all your fat. Now it's eating your muscle. It's melting your biceps and your thighs just to keep the engine running. You feel yourself getting smaller. You feel the harness getting looser because there's less of you to fill it. You look back over your shoulder. You want to see how far you've come. You see the spot where you ate lunch. It's right there. It looks like you could throw a rock and hit it. You've been hauling that boat for 4 hours since then. You check the sled meter. It says you've covered half a mile. All that pain, all that sweat, half a mile. You realize that at this rate, you won't make it to the coast for another 3 months, but you only have 3 weeks of food left. You don't talk about it. No one talks. Talking takes breath, and breath is too expensive. You just focus on the rope. The rope is thick and hempen. It's covered in ice. It's rough. It eats through your mittens. Your palms are a mess of blisters. The blisters pop. Then the fluid freezes. Then the ice rubs against the raw meat of your hand. You just grip harder. You have to. If you let go, the boat slips. If the boat slips, it smashes the legs of the guy behind you. If he can't walk, nobody moves. Your knees start to give out. Every step feels like someone is hammering a hot nail into your joint. The ice is slippery. You lose your footing. You go down on one knee. The weight of the boat doesn't stop. It keeps coming. It rams into your back. It pins you against a block of ice. You feel your ribs groan. You scream, but it just comes out as a puff of white steam. The guys in front feel the slack. They stop. They don't ask if you're okay. They just wait. They stand there with their heads down, saving their energy. You scramble up. You wipe the blood off your knee. You lean back into the strap. You give the signal. You pull. The sun starts to dip. It's not getting dark, but the light is turning gray. Your eyes are stinging. The glare off the ice is like a knife. You've been staring at white and blue for 14 hours. You're starting to see things. You think you see a house on the horizon. You think you see a tree. You know they aren't real, but you head toward them anyway because you need something to aim for. Finally, the lead man stops. He drops the rope. You drop yours. You don't sit down. If you sit down, you'll never get back up. You stand there, swaying. Your legs are shaking so hard you think your bones are going to rattle out of your skin. You have to set up the tent. Your fingers are numb. They're like wooden sticks. You try to grab the tent poles, but you can't feel them. You drop them. You pick them up. You drop them again. You're crying, not because you're sad, but because your body is just broken.
The tears freeze on your cheeks before they even reach your chin. You crawl into the tent. It's not warm. It's just out of the wind. You pull off your boots.
You have to be careful. Sometimes the skin of your heel sticks to the wool of the sock. If you pull too fast, the skin comes off with it. You look at your feet. They're white. They look like dead fish. You rub them until the blood starts to come back. It hurts. It feels like someone is pouring boiling oil over your toes. It's worse than the cold. You lie down in a sleeping bag that's already damp from the night before. You're shivering so hard the whole tent shakes. You close your eyes. You don't dream about home. You don't dream about your wife or a steak dinner. You dream about the harness. You dream about the weight of the boat pressing into your spine. You dream about the next half mile, because tomorrow the sun is going to come up and that boat isn't going to move itself. You're the horse, you're the engine, and you've got 299 miles to go. You're looking at 30 dogs. They aren't pets. They don't have cute names. They're engines. They're four-legged machines that pull your life across the ice. But an engine needs gas, and you've run out. You look at the sled. You look at the map. You look at the empty bags of grain and fat. Then you look at the dogs. You do the math in your head. It's cold math. It's the kind of math that keeps you awake when the wind tries to rip your tent open. If you have 30 dogs and 0 food, all 30 are going to starve. If they starve, they stop pulling. If they stop pulling, you stay here forever. So you pick one. You pick the weakest one, the one that's been limping for 10 miles, the one that can't keep the line tight anymore. You take him behind a snowdrift. You don't want the other dogs to see. You don't want to hear the noise they make. You use a knife because you can't spare a bullet. Bullets are for bears. Bullets are for emergencies. You use the blade. It's hard. Their fur is thick. Their skin is like leather. But you do it. You have to. You don't waste anything. You skin the dog. You cut the meat into chunks. You walk back to the team. They're watching you. They know. They can smell the blood. You toss the red chunks to the strongest dogs. You're feeding the team that the team. It's a closed loop. It's a cannibal machine. You watch them fight over the scraps of their harness mate. They growl. They snap. They swallow it whole. It gives them another 20 miles. It gives you another day. But then the days keep coming, and the miles don't end. Soon 30 dogs become 20. 20 become 10. You're killing your engines one by one to keep the others moving. But you aren't eating. Your own ribs are starting to show. Your belt is pulled to the last hole. You're lightheaded. You're chewing on the wooden toggle of your coat just to have something in your mouth. You look at the meat you're giving the dogs. You tell yourself you won't do it. You're a man. You're civilized. Then the hunger hits a new level. It's not a stomach ache. It's a fire. It burns in your throat. It makes your hands shake. You look at the last few huskies. You realize that if you don't eat, you won't have the strength to kill the next dog for them. So you sit by the fire. You put a piece of dog meat on a stick. You roast it. It smells like wet wool and old grease. You eat it anyway. It's tough. You have to chew each bite 50 times. It tastes like iron. It tastes like failure. But it's warm. And for a second, you think you're going to make it. You find the liver. It's huge. It's dark and heavy. You think you hit the jackpot. In your head, you remember hearing that organ meat is the good stuff. It's where the vitamins are. It's soft. It's easy to chew.
You and your partner sit there in the dark and you feast on it. You eat the whole thing. You feel full for the first time in a month. You fall asleep thinking you've turned a corner. You think you outsmarted the Arctic. A few hours later, the headache starts. It's not a normal headache.
It's like someone is driving a tent stake into the base of your skull. Every heartbeat makes your eyes pulse. You try to drink water, but you throw it up. You think it's just the exhaustion. You think you just need to walk it off. Then the skin starts to itch. It's a deep, angry itch. You scratch your arm and your fingernails come away wet. You look down. There's a red welt where you touched yourself. You scratch your face. A piece of skin the size of a nickel just falls off. It doesn't even hurt yet. It's just gone. You wake up the next morning and go to pull on your boots. Your feet feel heavy. They feel slippery. You pull your wool sock off and you stop breathing. The entire bottom of your foot is gone. The skin from your heel to your toes has detached in one solid piece. It's sitting in the bottom of your sock like a damp pink inner sole. You're looking at the raw muscles and the white tendons of your own foot. You try to scream, but your lips are cracked and bleeding. You look at your partner. He's worse. He's pulling giant sheets of skin off his thighs. It looks like he's peeling a sunburn, but it's thick. Its layers deep. He's gray. His hair is falling out in clumps on his sleeping bag. You didn't know about vitamin A. You didn't know that a husky's liver stores so much of it that it's a poison. You thought you were eating life. You were actually eating a slow-motion bomb. Your body can't process it. It's overdosing you. It's dissolving the glue that holds your cells together. You try to stand up. You can't. You have to wrap your raw feet in rags and grease just to keep the cold out. You try to walk, but every step is like walking on broken glass. The pain is so loud you can't hear the wind anymore. Then the madness moves in. Your brain starts to swell against your skull. You start talking to people who aren't there. You yell at the dogs you already ate. You think the ice is a giant white mouth trying to swallow you. Your partner starts laughing. He's not happy. He's just gone. He's lost his mind. He tries to crawl out into the snow without his coat. You have to tie him down. You're both rotting while you're still breathing. You see the irony now. You killed the dogs to save the men. Then the dogs killed the men from inside their own stomachs. You're dying from the very thing you thought was your prize. You're sitting in a tent, miles from anything, watching your own skin pile up on the floor. The sun comes up. It's bright. It hurts your eyes. You look at the last dog. He's skinny. His ribs are poking through his fur. He's looking at you. He's waiting for his breakfast. He doesn't know that you're the only thing left to eat, and you don't have the strength to pick up the knife. You just sit there. You wait for the poison to finish the job. You wait for the wind to cover the tent. You're not a horse anymore. You're not an engine. You're just meat. Meat doesn't stay fresh out there. It rots, even while you're still using it. It starts with a prickle. You've felt it before on a cold morning, like needles. But then the needles go away. It goes quiet. That's the danger. When the pain stops, the dying starts. Your blood stops moving. It turns to slush. The water inside your cells turns to ice. Think about a soda can left in the freezer. It expands. It bursts. That's what's happening to your toes, your fingers. They swell. They turn a weird, waxy white. You try to rub them. You try to get the heat back, but you're just rubbing dead skin. You're pushing ice crystals through your own veins. Wait a few days. The white turns to a deep purple. It looks like a bruise that won't go away. Then it goes black, jet black, like coal. It gets hard. It sounds like wood if you tap it on the floor. That's gangrene. That's the smell of a body rotting while the heart is still beating. You can't keep that. You keep that black meat on your foot and it'll kill you. The rot gets into your blood. It travels to your heart. You'll get a fever. Your brain will cook. You'll die in the tent, shaking, and no one can save you. So you have to get rid of it. You have to take it off. You don't have a surgeon. You don't have a hospital. You have a sea captain. You have a first mate who's good with his hands. There is no white room, no bright lights, just a flickering oil lamp and a dirty tent floor. The toolkit is simple. A pocket knife, maybe a pair of pliers from the supply chest, a sharpening stone. They'd take that knife and run it through a flame, not to kill every germ, just to get the hair and the grease off the blade. They'd pour a cup of rum, half for the patient, half for the man holding the knife. You sit on a supply crate. 2 guys hold your shoulders. 1 guy sits on your leg to keep it still. You look away, or maybe you stare right at it. The captain grabs your toe with the pliers. He tugs it. He isn't trying to slice through the meat yet. He's trying to find the joint. He's looking for the gap between the bones. He pushes the blade in. It doesn't bleed much at first. The flesh is dead. It's like cutting through cold leather. But then he hits the living part. That's when the screaming starts. He has to work fast now. He isn't a doctor. He's a butcher. He saws through the tendon. He snaps the bone. It's a wet, cracking sound, like a dry branch breaking under water. You feel everything. You feel every tooth of that blade. You feel every twist of the pliers. There is no gas to put you under. There is no numbing cream, just the rum and the cold. And the cold doesn't help. It just makes your nerves raw. Once the black part is gone, you've got a raw, red hole where your toe used to be. They don't have stitches. They don't have clean gauze. They take a rag, maybe a piece of an old shirt or a scrap of canvas. They soak it in carbolic acid if they have it. If not, they use more rum. They slap it on the wound. It burns like a hot iron. They tie it tight.
Now you've got a stump. You'd think that's the end of it. You'd think you'd get to lie down and rest. You don't. The group is moving in an hour. The wind is picking up and the rations are low. They can't wait for you to heal. If the group slows down, everyone dies. That's the math of the ice. It's cold and it's simple. So you stand up. You try to find your balance on a foot that isn't all there anymore. You shove that bloody rag back into your boot. The leather's frozen stiff. It's tight. It hurts to even breathe. You take a step. It feels like walking on a bed of nails. The blood soaks through the rag almost immediately. Then the cold hits the blood. It freezes. Now you're walking on a block of ice made of your own body. Every mile the wound reopens. You can feel the bone grinding against the inside of the boot. You leave a red trail in the snow, a little dot of red every few feet. The man behind you sees it. He doesn't say anything. He just keeps walking. He knows that if you fall, he has to leave you. He has to. You're not a friend anymore. You're a liability. You're a weight. You keep your head down. You watch the heels of the man in front of you. You count your steps. 1, 2, 3.
Each one is a spike of fire traveling up your leg. You do this for 10 miles, then 20. You do it until the sun goes down or your heart stops. Sometimes the fingers go next. You can't grip the sled ropes. You can't hold the matches to light the stove. You use your teeth. You use your elbows. You become a ghost of a man. You're just a collection of parts that are slowly being left behind on the trail. A toe here, a finger there. You're being eaten by the landscape, one piece at a time. And the worst part isn't the pain, it's the silence. The ice doesn't care that you're hurting. It doesn't care that you're brave. It just waits for you to stop. It waits for you to decide that the pain isn't worth the next step. And the moment you make that choice, the snow starts to cover you up. You're gone before you're even cold. The men who made it back, they weren't the same. They walked with limps. They had hands that looked like claws. They carried the smell of that tent in their nostrils for the rest of their lives. They'd sit in a warm parlor in London or New York years later, and they'd feel a phantom itch. They'd reach down to scratch a toe that had been buried in the Antarctic ice for a decade. They'd remember the sound of the pliers. They'd remember the look in the captain's eyes. No pity, just a job that had to be done. That's what they don't put in the history books. They talk about the flags. They talk about the maps. They don't talk about the bucket of black toes sitting in the corner of a frozen tent. They don't talk about the sound of a man trying to walk on a shattered foot because he's too afraid to die alone in the dark. But that's the reality. It isn't a story of glory. It's a story of survival. And survival is ugly. It's messy. It's the sound of a pocket knife hitting bone.
It's the choice to keep moving when every part of you is screaming to just sit down and let the white take you. You keep walking. You walk until there's nothing left to give. You walk until you're just a heartbeat wrapped in a frozen coat. You walk because the alternative is becoming part of the map. Just another marker in the wasteland. Just another piece of meat left out in the cold.
John Franklin didn't plan on becoming a marker in the wasteland. He was a hero, a big name. He'd been to the Arctic before. He knew the risks, or he thought he did. In 1845, he took 2 of the best ships in the British Navy and sailed away, the Erebus and the Terror. These weren't just boats, they were tanks. They had iron plates on the hulls. They had steam engines. They had enough food to last 3 years. 129 men, the best of the best. They thought they had outsmarted the planet. But the planet doesn't care about your plans. They vanished, total silence. For years, nobody knew where they went. Search parties found nothing but ice. Then they found the graves. 3 men buried on a tiny rock called Beachy Island. They were the lucky ones. They died early. They died before things got weird. See, Franklin bought his food from a guy named Stephen Goldner. Goldner won the contract because he was cheap. He had to fill 8,000 tin cans in 7 weeks. That's a lot of soup. That's a lot of meat. Tin cans were brand new back then, high tech. But you have to seal them. You have to keep the air out. Goldner's workers used lead. They used big sloppy beads of lead solder to close those lids. If you look at the cans today, you can see it. Gray streaks of metal frozen on the inside of the tin. The acid in the tomatoes and the salt in the beef started to work. It ate the lead. It dissolved it into the sauce. Every time a sailor sat down for dinner, he took a spoonful of poison. It didn't kill them fast. That's the catch. It built up. It soaked into their blood. It settled in their bones. It started to rot their minds. Think about what happens when your brain stops working. You get confused. You get angry. You stop trusting the guy standing next to you. Your joints ache. Your gums turn a strange shade of blue. You can't sleep. You lose your grip on what's real. By 1846, the ships were stuck. The ice moved in and gripped the hulls like a vice. It didn't let go, not that summer, not the next. They were trapped off the coast of King William Island, a place where nothing grows, a place where the wind never stops. The men sat in those dark cabins. They huddled around stoves, and they kept eating. They kept cracking open those tins. They were starving, so they ate the poison that was making them crazy. Franklin died first. We don't know how. Maybe his heart gave out. Maybe he just stopped fighting. But after he went, the wheels came off. The men who were left weren't the same men who left London. They were sick. They were shaking. Their teeth were falling out. In April 1848, they gave up. They left the ships. They thought they could walk to safety. They were hundreds of miles from anything. They had no horses, no dogs, just their own bodies. They packed sleds, but they didn't just pack food and fuel. Remember, their brains were gone. They packed silver spoons. They packed heavy books. They packed silk scarves and gold watches. They were dragging 1,000 pounds of trash across the jagged ice. They were dying of hunger, and they were carrying tea sets. They dropped as they walked. They didn't fall into the snow and sleep. They collapsed in their tracks.
Searchers found them years later. One guy was face down in the dirt. He still had his uniform on. He still had his pockets full of useless trinkets. He died trying to carry the British Empire across a frozen desert. But it gets worse. It always gets worse. The search parties found the bones. They didn't just see lead poisoning. They saw knife marks, clean cuts on the ribs, saws used on the skulls. These guys were so far gone, they started eating each other. They were the pride of the Navy. They were gentlemen, and they ended up carving the meat off their friends' bones because a cheap contractor used the wrong metal on a soup can. In the 1980s, a team of scientists went back. They dug up those first 3 graves on Beachy Island. The permafrost had kept the bodies perfect. They looked like they died yesterday. A guy named John Torrington was one of them. He was 20 years old. He was staring straight up, with his eyes half open. They took samples of his hair. They tested his tissues. The lead levels were insane. They were hundreds of times higher than what a human body can handle. He wasn't just sick, he was a walking chemical spill. The tech that was supposed to save them is what buried them. The British thought they could conquer the world with a hammer and a tin of beef. They thought they were too smart for the ice. But you can't fight chemistry. You can't fight a brain that's turning to lead. They didn't die because they weren't brave. They didn't die because they weren't strong. They died because they trusted a system that didn't care about them. They died because a bead of gray metal dripped into their dinner. Next time you see a map of the Arctic, look at the names. Franklin Strait, Terror Bay. They aren't just places, they're warnings. They're monuments to 129 men who spent their last days screaming at the wind, their blood full of poison, dragging silver spoons toward a horizon they would never reach. The ice didn't kill them, the food did. And the worst part is, they never saw it coming. They just thought they were hungry. They just thought the world was getting louder.
They didn't know they were already dead. They were just waiting for the cold to finish the job. But Ernest Shackleton wasn't a waiter. He looked at his men on that strip of gravel called Elephant Island, and he saw ghosts. He knew no one was coming for them. Not the Navy, not the whalers, nobody. They were off the map. So he did something that should have been a suicide mission. He took 5 guys. He picked a lifeboat called the James Caird. It was 22 feet long. To give you an idea, that's about the size of 2 large dining room tables pushed together. It was a piece of wood held together by hope and some old nails. He decided to sail that tiny scrap of a boat 800 miles. And he wasn't sailing through a lake. He was going across the Drake Passage. That is the nastiest, most violent stretch of water on the planet. They pushed off into the surf, and the cold hit them like a physical punch. They didn't have fancy gear. They had wool and reindeer skin. Within an hour, they were soaked. When you get wet in the Southern Ocean, you stay wet. The salt starts to dry in your clothes. It turns the fabric into sandpaper. Every time they moved an arm or a leg, the salt rubbed their skin raw. Their armpits and groins turned into bleeding sores. But they couldn't stop to fix it. They had to pull the oars. The Southern Ocean doesn't have waves. It has moving mountains. You're sitting in this tiny tub and you look up. You see a wall of black water 60 feet high charging at you. It's moving at 40 miles an hour. If that wave breaks on top of you, the boat vanishes. It just gets crushed like a soda can. So the guy at the tiller has to steer perfectly. He has to angle the boat just right so it slides up the face of the mountain instead of getting buried by it. They did this for 16 days, every minute of every hour. Then the ice came, not the ice in the water, but the ice from the sky. The spray would fly over the side and hit the deck. It froze instantly. It built up on the masts and the sides. This is where physics kills you. The ice has weight. As it builds up, the boat gets heavier. It sits lower in the water. It gets top-heavy. Shackleton felt the boat getting sluggish. It wasn't popping back up after a wave. It was wallowing. He knew if they didn't get that weight off, the next wave would just roll them over, and that would be the end. So they had to crawl out. They didn't have lifelines. They didn't have harnesses. They crawled out on their bellies onto a frozen, moving deck in the middle of a hurricane. They took frozen hatchets and they hacked at the ice. They had to chip it off while the boat was pitching 40 degrees. Their fingers froze to the metal tools. When they pulled their hands away, the skin stayed on the handle. They didn't scream. They didn't have the breath for it. They just kept hacking. If they stopped, they sank. So they didn't stop. The water they were supposed to drink was a nightmare, too. They had 2 casks. One got damaged during the launch. Salt water leaked in. So every time they took a sip to stop their throats from cracking, they were drinking salt. It makes your tongue swell up. It makes your head throb. You're surrounded by 1 billion gallons of water, and you're dying of thirst. They ate cold lard mixed with protein scraps. They called it hoosh. They couldn't light a stove most of the time because the boat was jumping too much. They just swallowed the cold fat and tried not to vomit. If you vomit, you lose moisture. If you lose moisture, you die faster. Then there was the navigation. This is the part that still makes sailors shake their heads. They had to hit a tiny speck of land called South Georgia Island. It's a needle in a haystack. If they missed it by even 1 mile, they'd blow right past it into the open Atlantic. There's no turning back against those winds. If they missed, they were dead men. The guy in charge of the map was Frank Worsley. He had a sextant. To use it, you need to see the sun and the horizon at the same time. but the sky was a gray blanket for days. When the sun finally peeked through for a few seconds, the boat was tossing like a cork. Worsley had to have 2 guys hold him steady by his legs while he tried to look through the glass. He'd snap his sight, then crawl back under the decking to do the math. His fingers were so frozen he could barely hold the pencil. He was guessing based on the stars he could barely see and the speed he thought they were going. If he carried a 1 instead of a 0, everyone on that boat dies in the dark. One night, Shackleton was at the tiller. He looked back and saw a line of white in the sky. He told the guys the weather was finally clearing up. Then he realized he wasn't looking at the sky. He was looking at the crest of a rogue wave. It was a vertical wall of water. He yelled for them to hang on. The wave hit like a freight train. It filled the boat to the gunwales. For a second, the boat just stopped. It sat dead in the water, sinking. They didn't look at each other. They didn't say goodbye. They grabbed every pot, every pan, every boot they had. They bailed. They threw water over the side like madmen for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour. Their muscles were screaming. Their hearts were hammering against their ribs, but they cleared the water. The boat floated again. After 14 days, their skin was yellow. Their legs were swollen to twice their normal size from the salt and the cold. They were vibrating with exhaustion. Then Worsley looked up through the spray. He saw a cliff. It wasn't a cloud. It was rock, South Georgia. They didn't have a party. They didn't cheer. They were too tired to speak. They had just finished the hardest boat ride in the history of the world. They had beaten the Southern Ocean in a piece of driftwood. They reached the shore, and they crawled onto the rocks. They were bleeding, they were starving, and they were freezing, but they were alive. Shackleton looked at the boat. Then he looked at the mountains they still had to climb to get to the whaling station. He didn't wait. He just started walking. He knew the clock was still ticking for the men he left behind. The ocean didn't kill him, so he wasn't going to let the land do it either. He just kept moving. Because in that part of the world, if you stop moving for a second, the planet takes you back. You think you know what hungry feels like. You don't. Not until you're looking at your own shoes and seeing a meal. Greeley and his 24 men learned that the hard way. They went up to the top of the map to study the stars and the tide. They built a house out of wood. They called it Fort Conger. They had plenty of salt beef. They had coal for the fire. The plan was simple. Every summer a ship would come. It would bring fresh meat. It would bring letters from home. It would bring more coal. The first year, the ice stayed thick. The ship couldn't get through. The men watched the horizon until their eyes hurt. Nothing. But they weren't worried yet. They had enough crackers to last another winter. Then the second year came. The ice didn't move. A ship tried to reach them. It hit a berg and the hull snapped like a dry twig. It went down in minutes. The sailors barely got into the lifeboats. They headed south and left Greeley's men behind. Now the math changed. The food was running low. Greeley looked at his charts. He made a call. They couldn't stay at the fort. They had to move south toward the rescue point. They packed their gear. They dragged their boats over the frozen slush. They walked until their feet bled into their socks. They reached Cape Sabine. They found a pile of rocks and a note left by the sailors who fled. There was no ship. There was no big stash of food, just a few cans of meat and some moldy bread. That was it. That was the end of the line. They built a hut out of stones and turned their boat upside down for a roof. They crawled inside. They stayed there for 8 months. You have to picture this. 25 men squeezed into a space the size of a garage. It's dark. The wind strips the heat right off your bones the second you step outside. You're living on a few ounces of bread a day. Then the bread runs out. You start looking for anything that might have a calorie in it. You take your knife. You cut a strip of leather from your sealskin boot. It's hard as a rock. You drop it into a pot of melted snow. You wait. You don't have wood for a real fire. You're burning the grease from a dead seal you found months ago. You take the leather out. It's slimy. It tastes like wet dog and old oil. You chew it for half an hour. You have to. If you swallow it whole, your stomach will just cramp up and push it back out. You get it down. It sits in your gut like a stone. It doesn't give you strength. It just stops the screaming in your belly for an hour. Then you eat the other boot. Then you start on the sleeping bags, reindeer skin. You scrape the hair off with a rock. You char the hide over the flame until it's black. You eat the soot. You eat the skin. Your gums start to swell. Your teeth get loose. That's the scurvy. You try to catch tiny shrimp in the water. You spend all day freezing your hands in the slush to catch a handful of bugs that aren't even as big as a fingernail. You divide them up. Everyone gets a spoonful. It's not enough to live. It's just enough to keep you awake while you die. Men started to go. First, it's the ones who gave up. They just stop moving. They close their eyes, and the frost takes them. You drag them out of the hut. You don't have the strength to dig a grave in the frozen ground. You just pile some snow on them and crawl back inside. You hear the wind howling through the cracks in the stones. You listen to the man next to you breathe. It sounds like a saw cutting through wet wood. Then things got ugly. Private Charles Henry was a big guy. He was stronger than the others. While everyone else was wasting away into skeletons, Henry seemed okay. He was moving. He was talking. People started to get suspicious. Then they caught him. He had his hand in the shrimp bag. He was stealing the last of the food, while the man next to him was too weak to lift his own head. In a place like that, a thief isn't just a criminal. He's a killer. Greeley saw it. He knew if he let it go, the whole group would turn into animals. They'd start hunting each other. He didn't hold a trial. He didn't have the energy for a speech. He sat down and wrote an order on a scrap of paper. He handed it to 3 men who could still stand. He told them to take Henry out onto the ice. He told them to shoot him. They led him out into the white. These men were ghosts. Their legs were sticks. Their fingers were black from frostbite. They held their rifles with shaking hands. Henry didn't fight back. He didn't have anywhere to run. He stood there in the wind. They pulled the triggers. 1 shot hit him in the chest, 1 in the head. They left him where he fell. They didn't bury him. They didn't pray. They just turned around and crawled back to the hut. They had 1 less mouth to feed. That's what it came down to. Survival isn't about being a hero. It's about the math of the calories. By the time the rescue ships finally saw the Cape in 1884, they almost missed the camp. They saw a tattered flag on a pole. They sent a boat to the shore. They found a tent. It had blown down. The canvas was flapping over the bodies. They pulled the fabric back, and the smell hit them. It was the smell of a tomb. They found Greeley. He was lying on his back. He couldn't move his arms. He was covered in his own waste. He looked up at the rescuers with eyes that didn't seem human anymore. He asked if they had any food. 19 men were dead. Some of them were just bones in the dirt. Some of them were missing pieces. The rescuers didn't ask questions. They just picked up the survivors and carried them to the ship. Out of 25 men who went up there to map the world, only 6 came home. The gear they brought back was useless. The notes they took didn't matter. All that was left was the story of what happens when you're trapped in the dark for 3 years with nothing to eat but your own clothes. You don't come back from that. Not really. You might be alive, but the ice stays inside you. You spend the rest of your life thinking about the taste of a boiled boot and the sound of a rifle shot on a quiet afternoon. You survived, but the planet still took a piece of you. It took the part that makes you a man. It left you with nothing but the hunger. That hunger isn't just in your gut. It moves up. It gets into your skull. It starts chewing on your memories and your logic. When you haven't eaten a real meal in a month, your brain starts to shrink inside your head. It's looking for fuel, and it doesn't care if it has to burn your sanity to get it. You start to see things. Not monsters, not ghosts, just people. Explorers called it the third man factor. You're harnessed to a sled. Your partner is 20 feet ahead of you, head down, pulling against the wind. You can hear his boots hitting the crust. Crunch, crunch, crunch. But then you hear a fourth crunch. You stop. The sound stops. You look around. There's nothing but flat white death for 100 miles in every direction. You start walking again. There it is, a shadow on the edge of your hood, a guy in a salt-stained parka. You don't recognize his face, but you know he's part of the team. You find yourself turning to him. You ask him how the sled is holding up. He doesn't answer. You don't care. You're just glad he's there. You try to hand him a piece of your last biscuit. Your hand goes through the air. There's nothing but a gust of snow. Your brain is so lonely and so scared, it manufactured a friend just so you wouldn't have to die by yourself. It's a hallucination born from a starving mind trying to save its own life. If there's a third man, you have a reason to keep walking. You have someone to stay strong for. It's the ultimate lie. Then the cold plays its final trick. This is the one that kills you with a smile. You've been shivering for weeks. Your teeth have cracked from the vibration. Your muscles are locked so tight they feel like stones. Then the shivering stops. Your body has nothing left to burn. It's out of wood. It's out of oil. The tiny valves in your blood vessels that keep the heat near your heart just quit. They go limp. All that warm blood that was huddled in your core floods back out to your arms and legs. For the first time in months, you feel hot. You don't just feel warm. You feel like you're standing in an oven. You feel like your skin is melting. You're standing in a 50 below gale and you're sweating. You think you're roasting alive, so you start pulling. You rip the buttons off your heavy wool coat. You tear at your undershirt. You kick off your boots and throw your socks into the wind. You stand there in the middle of the ice, totally naked, because your brain is screaming that you're on fire. They call it paradoxical undressing. I call it the ice making a fool out of you right before it takes your pulse. Search parties find the bodies weeks later. They find a man curled in a ball, bare skin pressed against the frozen ground. Most of them aren't just lying there. They try to dig. They use their fingernails to claw into the ice. They try to burrow into the ground like a dog. It's a primal instinct. The brain is gone, but the animal part of you wants to hide. You die naked, dirty and confused, 5 feet away from a sleeping bag that could have saved your life. Sometimes the mind stays clear enough to see the end coming. You realize the math doesn't work. You're the weak link.
You've got a foot that's turned black and smells like a wet basement. You're the reason the sled is moving 3 miles a day instead of 10. You look at your friends, you see their sunken cheeks, you see the way they look at the last bag of oats. You know if you stay, everyone dies. You don't make a scene, you don't ask for a vote. You just wait for a morning when the wind is screaming the loudest. You stand up, you don't put on your coat, you don't grab your mittens. Your friends know what's happening, but they don't look at you. They can't. You look at the man nearest to you, and you tell him you're going out for a walk. You tell him you might be some time. You step out of the tent and into the white. The wind hits you like a truck, but you don't turn back. You walk until your heart stops. You do it so the guys inside don't have to watch you die. You do it because it's the only way to be a man one last time. You walk until you're just a bump in the snow, and the wind covers you up before the tent is even out of sight. The ice doesn't care about your courage. It doesn't care about your sacrifice. It just waits for you to stop moving. It waits for the moment your internal fire goes out. And when it does, it turns you into a monument, a frozen statue of a man who thought he could beat a planet that doesn't even know he's there. You're left with nothing but the silence silence that was there before you arrived, and the same one that will be there long after your bones turn to dust. You went looking for the edge of the world. You found it, and then you stepped off.
The silence doesn't break all at once. It takes years. You have to understand how big the world was back then. There were no radios, no satellites, no way to call for help when the ice started crushing your hull like an eggshell. You left London or New York 3 years ago. Your family thinks you're just busy. They're sitting down for dinner. They're going to the theater. They're complaining about a cold draft in the hallway. They have no idea your ship is a pile of toothpicks and you're living in a hole in the ground. They aren't looking for you yet. They won't look for a long time. That's the reality of the rescue. It isn't a race against time. It's a slow crawl through a calendar. Sometimes 3 or 4 years go by before anyone even realizes you're missing. The world just keeps turning. People get married. Governments fall. New inventions change the way people live. And you're still there. You're staring at the same white horizon. You're waiting for a sound that isn't the wind. Then, one day, it happens. You see a black dot. It's not a bird. It's not a seal. It's a mast. You don't cheer. You don't have the breath for it. You just sit there and watch it get bigger. You wonder if your mind finally snapped. You've seen cities in the clouds before. You've seen forests in the snow. You wait for the ship to vanish, but it stays. It gets closer. It drops anchor. The men who come ashore don't see a hero. They don't see a bold explorer. They see a ghost. You're a walking skeleton. Your skin looks like old leather stretched over a skull. Your beard is a mat of grease and dried blood. You smell like rancid blubber and unwashed hair. You try to stand up to greet them. You fall over. Your muscles are gone. Your body ate them months ago just to keep your heart beating. The sailors pick you up. They carry you like a child. You're a grown man, and they can lift you with one arm. You weigh 90 pounds, maybe less. They get you onto the ship. They don't give you a feast. They can't. If you ate a steak right now, it would kill you. Your stomach has shrunk to the size of a walnut. They give you a spoonful of broth, just one. It's warm. It tastes like life. But then your gut twists. You spend the next hour retching into a bucket. Your body forgot how to handle fuel. It thinks you're trying to poison it. Then comes the bath. They have to cut your clothes off. The wool has fused with your skin. It's grown into your scabs. They peel the fabric away and you bleed. They put you in a tub of hot water. You think it'll feel like heaven. It doesn't. It feels like you're being boiled alive. Your nerves are waking up and they're screaming. You howl. You try to climb out. The sailors have to hold you down. You're clean for the first time in 1,000 days, and it's the worst pain you've ever felt. They feed you more, slowly, a bit of bread, a piece of soft fruit. You get your strength back, but it's a slow crawl. You look in a mirror for the first time. You don't know the man looking back. He looks old. He looks haunted. He looks like he's seen the end of the world and didn't like what he found there. The ship heads south. The air gets thicker. The ice disappears. You see green. You forgot green was a color. You stare at a tree for 3 hours. You touch the leaves. They're soft. Everything in the north was hard. Everything was sharp. Now things are soft. It scares you. You get to the city. Let's say it's London. The first thing you notice isn't the buildings. It's the noise. It's a physical weight. There are horses. There are wagons. There are thousands of people shouting and moving. It's a riot. You want to run back to the tent. You want the silence back. You realize you don't know how to live here anymore. You get on a train. This is the new world. It moves at 30 miles an hour. To you, it feels like a rocket. You grip the wooden seat until your knuckles turn white. You're terrified. You've faced polar bears with a pocket knife. You've walked across shifting ice floes in the dark. But a steam engine makes you want to hide under the bed. The speed is wrong. The vibration is wrong. You're moving too fast through a world that's too busy. You buy a newspaper. You sit in a cafe. You have a cup of coffee. You read about a war in a country you've never heard of. You read about a fire in a factory. You read about a new play on Broadway. You realize something. None of it mattered. While you were dying in the dark, these people were arguing about taxes. They were worried about the price of coal. They were living their tiny, noisy lives. They didn't know you were gone. And honestly, they didn't care. You look at your hands. The scars are still there. The frostbite took the tips of your fingers. You can't feel the warmth of the coffee cup. You're back in the world, but you aren't part of it. You've got the smell of the ice in your lungs. You've got the taste of dog meat in the back of your throat. You've been eating your sled dogs for 2 years, and now you're looking at a menu with 10 different kinds of cake. It makes you want to scream. You try to talk to people. They ask you what it was like. You start to tell them. You tell them about the wind. You tell them about the time you had to burn your own sled to keep from freezing. You tell them about the silence. They look at you with pity. They nod. Then they change the subject. They want to talk about the weather. They want to talk about the horse races. They don't want to hear about the edge of the world. It makes them uncomfortable. It makes them realize how small their own lives are. So you stop talking. You sit in your nice house. You sleep in a soft bed. But you can't sleep. The bed is too soft. The room is too quiet. Or it's too loud. You miss the sound of the ice cracking. You miss the way the wind sounded through the canvas. You're home. You're safe, you're fed, but a part of you stayed up there. A part of you is still sitting in that tent, staring at a frozen horizon. You're back in the city, you're riding the trains, you're reading the news, but you're just a ghost in a suit. The ice didn't kill you, it just waited until you got home to finish the job.
You went looking for the edge of the world. You found it. And now you can't ever really come back.
So you come back, or you don't. But the guys who followed in those frozen footsteps eventually figured out they were doing it all wrong. They realized you can't fight the ice with ego. You can't out-muscle a glacier. For 200 years, the big empires sent these massive oak-ribbed ships into the pack. They thought thick wood and iron bolts would keep the world out. They were wrong. The ice doesn't care how much money you spent on your haul. It just waits. It grips the sides of the ship and it squeezes. It snaps those huge beams like they're dry twigs. Then it swallows the whole thing and moves on. The men who survived the next wave of trips stopped bringing the big ships. They saw what happened to the Franklin expedition. They saw the wrecks. So they started building smaller. They built ships that the ice would just push up instead of crushing down. They stopped trying to break the door down and started trying to slide through the cracks. But the gear was the real killer. These guys used to head out into 40 below wearing heavy wool coats. Think about that. You're working, you're sweating. That sweat goes into the wool. Then you stop moving for 5 minutes. That wet wool freezes solid. Now you aren't wearing a coat anymore. You're wearing a suit of armor made of ice. It saps the heat right out of your core. It weighs 60 pounds. It kills you while you're standing still. The guys who finally made it to the poles didn't look like British officers. They looked like the Inuit. They watched how the locals lived and they copied them. They threw away the wool and the brass buttons. They started wearing caribou skins. They wore seal hide. These skins don't trap the moisture. They breathe. They keep the wind out, but they let the sweat go. They learned how to build a house out of the very thing trying to kill them. They carved blocks of snow and made domes. Inside, with a little lamp made of blubber, it stays warm enough to sleep. It's the difference between shivering in a canvas tent and actually getting some rest. And they stopped walking. That was the big one. The early guys had this weird idea that dragging your own sled was more noble. They called it man-hauling. They'd harness themselves to 1,000 pounds of gear and pull until their hearts gave out. They'd drop dead in their tracks from the sheer effort. Robert Falcon Scott did that. He insisted on it. He thought using dogs was cheating. He thought it was beneath a gentleman. So what happened? He and his men starved to death in a tent just a few miles from a food depot. They couldn't move anymore. Their bodies just quit. The guys who won the race, guys like Amundsen, they used dogs. They didn't just use them to pull. They used them as a mobile pantry. As the sleds got lighter and they didn't need as many dogs, they'd kill the weakest ones and feed them to the others. They'd eat them themselves, too. It sounds heartless. It sounds brutal. But it's why they got home and Scott didn't. They didn't care about being noble. They cared about the math of survival. They learned that the Arctic doesn't have a moral code. It just has a temperature. You look at the photos of those later expeditions and you see the change. The faces are still haunted, but the gear is different. They have the fur hoods. They have the bone goggles to stop the sun from burning their retinas. They stopped trying to bring London with them. They accepted that out there, on the white waste, you are nothing. You are just a guest, and if you don't follow the rules of the house will bury you. We learned a lot from all those dead guys. We learned about scurvy.
We learned that eating lime juice doesn't work if you boil all the vitamins out of it first. We learned that lead solder in tin cans will drive a crew insane before it starves them. We learned that the human mind snaps when it doesn't see a tree or a bird for 6 months. We got better at the gear. We got better at the food. We have satellites now. We have heated boots and GPS. You can fly to the South Pole in a few hours and have a hot meal in a pressurized building. But the ice doesn't care about our upgrades. It's still the same ice that crushed those wooden ships in 1845. It's still the same wind that froze the breath in Scott's throat. And the proof is still out there. That's the thing people don't like to talk about, the bodies. When you die in the high Arctic, you don't rot. It's too cold for the bacteria to work. You don't turn into a skeleton. You just turn into a statue. Right now, if you go to the right spots on the permafrost, those guys are still there. They're sitting exactly where they died over a century ago. There are guys from the Franklin trip buried in shallow graves on Beechy Island. A few years ago, researchers dug them up to see what killed them. They opened the coffins, and the men looked back at them. Their skin was still there. It was blue and tight, but it was there. Their hair was still long. Their clothes were still stitched together. They looked like they had just fallen asleep 5 minutes ago. They had been dead for 140 years, but the ice kept them perfect. One guy, John Torrington, he's the famous one. He's about 20 years old. He's wrapped in a gray blanket. His eyes are half open. You can see the grime under his fingernails from his last day of work. You can see the frost on his eyelashes. He isn't a ghost. He's a physical fact. He's a reminder that once the ice takes you, it keeps you. It doesn't let go. He's still sitting there in the dark, under a few feet of frozen dirt, waiting for a spring that's never gonna come. So we stopped the story here. We learned the lessons. We changed the clothes. We traded the dogs for engines. But the edge of the world hasn't moved an inch. It's still right where it's always been. It's cold, it's quiet, and it's hungry. We think we conquered it because we can fly over it. We think we won because we have a map. But the guys in the ice know better. They're still out there, holding their breath, waiting for the next person who thinks they're tough enough to survive the silence. You can go look for the edge of the world if you want. Just remember that it's a one-way trip. Once you find it, it stays with you. And sometimes it keeps you forever. Goodbye.